Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Oh, that was a bit loud.
And it was loud, and welcome if you are listening to us live on Wednesday evening. It's our budget special following the first Labour Party budget for 14 years. Rachel Chuckles Reeves got up this afternoon and rocked the mic to deliver the first Labour budget. And we've been analysing it for fully half an hour, I would think, if we give ourselves due credit.
Yeah, even as much as that. But that's not out of disinterest. That's just purely out of the fact that that's when we both walked in our respective doors.
Yes, yeah, and I guess if I think my first sort of before we dive down into what's changed, what are the ups, downs, and rounds. I think my overall impression of the budget was I think I'm slightly baffled by it all, if I'm honest. Simon, I kind of, you know, I we'll have a look at the headlines in a minute, but or maybe I would describe it as a bit of a chameleon budget. What were your first thoughts?
I mean, I think, like so many budgets, it was bound to kind of take with one hand and kind of give with another. I think so much of it had been talked about in advance, hinted, suggested, teased in advance, that it was kind of almost hard to be kind of surprised by some of it. But I think for me, there's some interesting things there about keeping promises around taxes, and I'm sure about not raising taxes, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. And there's some interesting things about some impact actually for employers, and kind of those kind of parts on the economy, but also some commitments about key spending in fundamental areas that that are that are important to the voters, and that were kind of key parts of Labour's manifesto pledge. But I don't think anyone who had any real understanding or appreciation of what the state of the economy was at the election was going to be expecting some sort of massive, glorious fanfare of, oh, all the solutions are here.
Hmm.
But it also did have more of an upbeat tone to it than perhaps was the things are going to be hard for quite a while tone, which kind of seemed to prevail the Labour Party conference, to be fair.
Yeah, and I think by a chameleon budget, I think the piece which I kind of managed to listen to to a fair chunk of it in my lunch hour at work, and there was quite a lot of it that I was kind of joining along with the here, because a lot of the language was was very kind of, well, it was very conservative. It was very, business growth. There was a lot there about welfare reform and, getting people back into work. And, depending on how you listened to what was described, it will be viewed, particularly amongst the disabled community, with, quite a degree of skepticism and fear. It's very interesting that a lot of the language I felt was very similar to Tory budgets before it, and it'd be interesting to see over the next week how, you know, apart from the stereotype responses we'd expect, kind of how it has been received. So you've got your magic list there about what's changed. Shall we start picking on some key headlines?
Yeah, let's kind of pick on some stuff. So I guess the easiest place to start is what's not changed.
Hmm.
So let's kind of look at that. So there isn't, as we said, any change to personal, and I emphasize personal, VAT, national insurance, and income tax.
Yeah.
But also no change at the moment for personal tax allowance. No change.
Although they did flag, didn't they, that I
Yes,
think is it 28, 29 or
yes,
20. It was
yes.
basically we're going to stick with what the Tories forced upon you, but at the end of that it'll rise in line with inflation, which I thought was an interesting kind of line to take. I think it's a policy we've spoken about on the podcast before, and I don't think it's one. The freezing of it wasn't something that either of us were in favour of. So, for me, there's a thumbs up for that one, and possibly could have been braver and done it sooner, but you know, we'll take that.
Yeah, it's I mean, I guess it could have been worse. Um, the So no change to profits from additional property. Inheritance tax frozen until 2030, which is extending it by another 2 years. And I think one of the bits that I kind of zoned in on in the middle of my workday was the bit about the 5p cut in fuel duty on petrol. I thought there was going to be a bit about explaining why that couldn't be maintained.
I,
Um,
this one was one of the most baffling ones. Sorry to jump in,
no, you
Simon, but
you jump, you jump.
well, and the reason why I jump in is we as we drove home tonight, I asked Nikki just to check out the price at the pump, and currently at the end of our road, it's £1.35 a litre, and that is down about 10p on what it was a couple of months ago. And if I go back 18 months, nearly 2 years,
Mm.
it was around £1.90. So, obviously the war in Ukraine caused all of the fuel to rocket. And so I kind of looked at that and thought, well, 7p a litre, which is what it would be if they put it up by the 1.7 inflation and took away the 5p, didn't it felt to me like that was one of those ones which would have got a lot of in the headlines. But if you're a driver filling up your car, and in just that 18-month window, you've seen about a 55p variance in the price you pay at the pumps. So that one almost felt to me a little bit like an own goal, particularly as I thought we were supposed to be discouraging folk from using petrol and diesel cars.
Yeah, but I think they're facing you know, you're buggered if you go one way and you're buggered if you go the
Mm,
other way on fuel duty, because from an environmental standpoint, yes, you're absolutely right. Part of the encouraging people to move towards EV is um is actually the unaffordability of, or the, the greater affordability of travel on EV. Obviously, purchasing them is still a big
mm,
outlay. But yeah, so I almost expected them to try to make the case that there's a reason why that would need to come up. But again, I think that when you look at the impact that that would have on the cost of living of people, it's a thing that's going to directly hit people in the pocket.
yeah,
I think that in balance has to kind of do that. But there's other things later on in the budget that speak to encouraging that switch.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I expect, if I'm honest, I thought they were going to take the flak and reverse that cut in fuel duty. It's like so many things that have kind of led up to this. Like, it's almost like, to a degree, some of them were nice juicy things that were left there, but were eventually going to expire and explode in someone's face and
mm,
cause a problem. Um, and like the income tax giveaways before the last election. Um, it, yeah, I thought they were going to go the other way. So
yeah,
I was quite pleased from a point of view of, yes, that's going to be a good thing for most working people, and at the end of the day, most of the things that we buy transport to us by some form of road vehicle.
yeah,
And most of that transport is not electric, despite all of the stuff that, the likes of Amazon and I think some of the supermarkets do about their home deliveries being electric. Um,
yeah. And I guess
yeah,
I guess my final point on it, Simon, is it's by my reckoning about 35% down on where it was 2 years ago. So to bump it back up by 7%, I get it. As you stand here today, it depends what, with all measurement and statistics, it's where you measure from, doesn't it? Your tank of fuel for next week would end up going, which end of the spyglass do you look through? Because if it went up by 7%, you'd kind of go rumph. But if you looked at it in terms of where it was 18 months, you know, 2 years ago, well, it's down by it would still be down by sort of 30%. You kind of think, but anyway, they didn't. They left it where it was, despite whispers they were going to take it away. So let's keep going.
No, so yeah, some good ones there. So um, so reductions, employment allowance. So this is what you smaller businesses will use to mitigate some of their national insurance liability. That's actually increasing from 5,000 to 10,500.
Yeah.
So good thing for small businesses there. Um, but then when you look at kind of increases of cost, you start looking at tax band thresholds won't begin rising, as we were saying earlier on, until 2028. A capital gains tax on profits of share sales. Um, the basic rate going up from 10% to 18, and the higher rate going up from 20 to 24. Unspent pensions subject to tax from 2027. I think that's going to start pissing some people off.
Mm.
Um, company NI. See, I think this is the thing where I think there's going to be a small business
The,
kind of reaction. Is the
mm,
NI
the,
on of 15% on salaries over 5K from April? It was 13.8% at 9,100K. So it's an increase of a just over a percent, but the threshold has been halved nearly.
yeah, and this is in terms of the laws of unintended consequences.
Hmm.
I think this one, coupled with the huge jumps in the living wage, this, if anything, is the one that sort of worries me most when you put the two together. So, they announced, I think, that the living wage was going to jump 6.7% to £12 and a bit,
Yeah.
and that they were going to narrow the age band, and I think the 18 to 21 band goes up to £10 an hour, which is a 16% rise. And I guess when I was doing the sort of sums in my own mind, if you look at businesses which rely on a lot of minimum wage workers, and you add on that national insurance rise that the employer's got to pay, if their salary costs are going up by a sort of minimum of 7%, and there's another 1% on top for the national insurance rise, that's quite a chunk being taken out of their profit margin. And what we do know about businesses, Simon, is they seldom take those hits on the chin. And I do wonder whether the two combined are going to lead to higher price rises, and potential
Yeah,
inflation.
I think there's I mean, some people have kind of expressed a concern about that. I guess it remains to be seen. I think the government's argument was that sorry, excuse me, was that people with money in their pocket tend to spend it, and therefore that's better overall for the economy. Businesses are going to have to make a decision as to where they kind of trim, where they find those savings from. It will be, I think, a cold day in hell before they start taking a voluntary reduction in profits, or indeed starting to reduce the difference between frontline workers and CEO pay. I don't think that's kind of going to happen. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think it's. I mean, that one's kind of set to raise 25 billion. So it's
Oh, it's
it's not an
it's a
unreasonable kind of chunk of money, but there's a bit of me that thinks, would it have been too expensive to administer to have changed that so it impacted businesses over a certain size? Because if you look at the Tesco and the Amazons, um, they're in a different situation. Whereas if you look at your small businesses, your small single outlet or retailer, or you're talking about your single trader, um, they're not a single trader either if they've got staff. Sorry.
No, no,
Um, so,
yeah, no,
but did you get my kind of point? If it's a small
yeah,
business below a certain level of turnover, I think maybe you could have softened that by having them exempt from that increase, and even if you meant a couple of decimals of percentage increase higher for the larger companies, that's the thing I think was a trick missed, but perhaps that was too difficult to administer.
yeah, and I think there's always that element, isn't there, with any change to tax legislation. If you make it too specific, the tax lawyers that work for these big corporations are always very skilled in the art of making sure that they don't pay it. So
Yeah.
I guess it's that, it's 1.2%. It raises 25 billion. Um, I guess there is this element of, you know, as a fiscal conservative, and I know as a conservative, I'm always supposed to, harumph and hurruff about the nanny state and taxation and all of the rest. But this felt to me like the least of all evils in terms of the options that were on the table. And having ruled out personal tax increases in the manifesto and made such a big thing of it, this was really the only place they had left to go.
Yeah, once you've kind of backed yourself into a corner in that way, um, you are kind of limiting your options in that kind of field. Some other things that were going up, that £2 cap on bus fares is going up to £3. That applies outside of London and Greater Manchester. So I don't think
Can,
a pound
can we
makes a massive thing, but it is. I think it helps lots of people get to and from work in a very kind of simple and cost effective way. Sorry,
but
say something.
but this is where I've got my head in my hands on this one,
Okay.
because if you go to work 5 days a week,
Yeah,
and I presume that that £2 fare is a one-way journey,
it is. Yeah.
then your bus fares have just gone up if you work 5 days a week by £10 a week.
Yeah.
And if you are a car driver,
Hmm.
they've saved you from having your 7% increase in fuel duty,
Hmm.
which, if my maths is roughly correct, means if they would have applied that, then only people who spent £130 a week on fuel would have been paying £10 more. But your folk who are going on the bus, they've hit them with a £10 a week rise.
Yeah, but don't forget the cost to the government is the subsidy, so it's the other part of what the cost of the ticket would be, not just the
Yeah, yeah,
between
yeah.
£2 and £3.
Yeah, I guess
I
I
get,
guess
get.
if I'm looking at A and B
Mm,
individually, the government the individual is £10 a week worse off if they're a bus user. Um, and yeah, and that's why I said with this whole budget, Simon, I'm a bit baffled. Protecting car drivers and hitting bus travellers, I just it just feels a bit muddled to me.
well, on the flip side, the next thing, vehicle excise duty for all but the most efficient new petrol cars to double in the first year. So again,
It,
kind of pushing the move to EV, um, and a £2.20 new tax per 10 millilitres of vaping liquid from October year after next. So it's quite kind of
yeah,
they're not as it doesn't appear that they're well, they appear to some degrees have different risks than smoking does, but
yeah,
you know professionals that actually understand the data will understand to what sort of degree. Tobacco tax increased 2% above inflation. Stamp duty surcharge for second homes up from 3% to 5% in England and Northern Ireland. So again, that's that. Sorry, go on.
Well, that I mean, the tobacco thing you kind of understand. The government's made it pretty clear. The previous government was, was all for pushing the, raising the age that you can buy cigarettes. And I think the vaping thing is one of those ones where I think everyone was quite pro vape when they saw it as the, if you like, the step down from cigarettes to vape, from vape to giving up. I don't think what anybody foresaw is a whole new generation of people who didn't smoke, who took up vaping. So,
No, they didn't see
it,
it become effectively the gaseous equivalent of alcohol pops.
yes, yes, I think it's a fair point. And in terms of that, the kind of, the increase in stamp duty on second homes, that was another one. Again, my keyword of baffled. 3% to 5%. I kind of think, well, that wasn't that one that you could have gone perhaps a bit harder on. I, 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 I think from a, from a populist standpoint, you know, I think, that kind of, oh, well, I can barely afford to buy a second home now. Um,
Oh dear.
you know, yeah,
Yeah,
it just struck me as
yeah, and
and
but there was some other things. So some of the other outliers that they called out that kind of give with one hand and take with the other. I'd left the thing about the minimum wage in kind of this column, which was the over 21s rising from 11.44 to 12.21, but the 18-year-olds rising to £10, but also talking about moving to a single adult rate, so essentially dispensing with the different rate between 18 and 20,
yeah.
which I do think is an interesting move. If you've got adults that are actually trying to live, that are trying to afford to live, that you kind of want to be contributing to the economy and trying to find places to live, then it does seem a bit shitty, for want of a technical term, to be able to legally you know, pay them £3 less an hour than you can someone that's a couple of months older. Um,
Yeah, I mean the phased age thing. I saw. I again, it's another one of these things which I sort of get, but I sort of don't. And it's all about somebody's personal circumstances. Because you know, if you are 18, you're living in, you're trying to live independently in a
mm,
flat or a room on your own and do all of those things, then your bills are no less than a 22, 23-year old. Get equally, there's a flip side that says, if you are if you're still living with mum and dad and all those kind of things. So I think, it does simplify things. I think you know, and again, when we talk about, some of those, I touched on the potential impact for those hospitality jobs, which rely heavily on a sort of student high turnover market. Again, if we think about some of our larger fast food vendors, I do wonder whether when you put the minimum wage, the closing of that gap, and the increase in employers' NI together, um, your crusty burger might be costing you a bit more come the middle of next year.
well, I mean, it might, but let's be honest. If McDonald's burgers, other fast food is available, become £3 or £5 dearer, it's not really going to hurt if that means that less people buy them.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not an, I agree with you, it's not an essential food
Mm,
stuff.
It, it, it's
Yeah.
despite all attempts to kind of make it appear otherwise. Um, Triple lock of state pension increases by 4 point increases the state pension by 4.1% next year.
Mm.
I'm sure the easy thing was of if only that was before winter. Um, the carers allowance increasing earning thresholds from 195 to 195 pound from 151 pound per week. Um, Confirming that they're funding the tunnelling for HS2
I'm
to
not
ensure it
I'm
gets
not sure your numbers are right there,
what?
Simon.
No? Am I?
No, I I I think the carers allowance has
Mhm.
actually jumped markedly.
What, from
Um,
151 to 195 pound per week?
yeah, I thought that 151 number was much lower. Um,
That may
so
a rushing in the door.
Yeah,
jobbies?
yeah.
Apologies.
No, and it is a um, it's interesting because there was also some stuff about looking at overpayment, um, because again, one of the things with carers allowance is that once you start in a year receiving it, the way it works currently is they will keep paying it to you until the end of the year, and then work out whether you were entitled to it, and if you weren't, you're then invited to give it back.
Yeah, that
So
seems a bit bonkers.
yeah, so and I thought the threshold was something like £81 a week. So there is that element of it very easy to go over, um, and they then look at your week to week earnings rather than an average. So you know, I think it is you know, I think with people having more caring responsibilities, it's one of those things which that was a policy that made sense to me.
Okay. A good one. Some rushing through the outlines there. So, committing to funding the tunnelling to take HS2 to Euston Station in London, which seems it's bound to be expensive, but a bit of a no-brainer rather than have it start miles outside or on the outskirts of London. That's no, you can't kind of really claim it's an inner London connection if it doesn't actually come into London. Uh,
Yeah, popped up on my Facebook feed from I think 11 years ago,
mhm.
where I must have stolen it, um, where I had remarked that HS2 will probably be as expensive and as useful as a staircase to the moon. So I've not been a fan of HS2 for a long time, and it seems to be the money pit that keeps on giving. So
Well,
I get it in terms of, yeah, you can't stop it 4 miles out of town, but yeah, what
something
a
that's a rare
dreadful.
thing that you and the Green Party agree on. Then,
Yeah, this is marvelous.
extra £500 million for English potholes. I don't know whether that's just literally printing the money and filling the holes with them. I don't think so, but you might want to. It probably won't.
No.
Um, Day-to-day spending on NHS and education to increase 4.7% in real terms this year, but smaller for the years after. Home Office budget to shrink by 3.1% this year and 3.3% next, in real terms. I don't quite know what the Home Office has done to incur the wrath of of Rachel Reeves, but not
Yeah, and I think
not as much
there, there
priority.
yeah, there was a talk as well of there being a 2% efficiency saving in every department expected, um, kind of every year, which is something she called out. And I sort of get it, and it's always good to be more efficient. But yeah,
It,
yeah,
it is just well, I don't know. Large organisations seem to whenever they're trying to find cost savings, they seem to spend lots of money on consultants, um, and then wonder why they don't necessarily realise the savings because they don't necessarily enact all of the things that need to do the cost saving measures, and actually in the end complicate their processes even further, and then create more kind of reduce productivity as a result, which is the opposite of
yeah,
what the economy needs. But who knows? Extra £1.3 billion extra funding for local councils. Now that's I'm sure is going to be good news for local councils like Portsmouth, Havant, Fareham, Gosport.
yep,
It'll be interesting to see how that kind of divs out. The local council is now going to get to keep all proceeds from right to buy sales, as of next month, although the right to buy discounts are going to be reduced. So again, kind of speaking to the flip side of the second home kind of thing that we talked about earlier on, and about the capital gains taxes.
mm,
It seems a kind of an interesting kind of quandary there. Also, social housing providers allowed to increase rents above inflation in a multi-year settlement. Um, so I don't kind of, if I'm honest, I don't kind of get the logic of we know we have a housing issue, we know we have a cost of living issue, we know we have some people that are really struggling to be able to afford their rent, but none of these are increasing the amount of housing, which is the only way, supply and demand. The only way you make prices go
yeah,
down overall is ensure there's more provision of it. None of this, and again, this is a quick look, so maybe there was something else that I missed
yeah.
that's going to lead to there being more properties being built. I think I don't kind of see anything like that. And again, the affordable homes budget boosted by so I've said 500. I think that's meant to be 500 million, but runs
Yeah,
till 2026. So
again, it's another baffling one, isn't it? Because
yeah,
if I look at well publicised Hampshire County Council
mhm,
are 176 million in the hole for April, and they've been looking to make some really tough decisions on what services they cut and where they can save.
mhm.
Well, that policy seems like a green light that the more of their housing stock they can flog off cheap for cash, the more they can close that hole because they get to keep all of it. It's and again, there might be some accounting rules behind it to stop them doing that, but I'm
But
the
to some degree, I mean, some of the because Portsmouth has kind of um, done a lot of buying back houses
mm,
that were previously sold under right to buy, but they have still sold off some properties that, and I think there were some examples that we looked at last year where the case that I think we'd heard from Darren Sanders, hadn't we? Where these were essentially properties that it was going to cost the council too much to maintain them or to upgrade them in
yeah
order to meet current standards. So in those sorts of situations, they're better to dispose of them and then kind of look at other ways um,
yeah
of either building new or repurchasing basically stuff that's kind of already been sold before. But I do find it kind of like a strange kind of cyclical thing. But to me, I kind of keep coming back to the supply versus demand side.
mm,
The only way really to kind of make a dent in it is to make sure that there's more supply. And that involves, I don't know, it seems like a groundbreaking policy, but that does involve building more houses.
yeah, and I think you can restrict the demand and that second house. But I guess if with the average price of a house now well over 200,000, if you've got the spare cash knocking about to buy another one, then the stamp duty on that was £6,000 before, it's £10,000 now. Um, I don't see that 4,000 as being a deal breaker if you've got a lion's share, a quarter of a million laying about in
No,
ready. So
if you're in that situation, and the last one I kind of made a note of there was 11.8 billion for victims of the infected blood scandal, and 1.8
yeah,
billion for the victims of the post office scandal.
and I guess where I get to with the whole budget is lot of noise about 40 billion in tax rises. That's the kind of headline, and I'm sure later this evening I will get an email from the Conservative Party, and that will be their lead story. I think the bit for me, Simon, is that it felt like an awful lot was given away. And that's not to say that the victims of the blood scandal or anything else, but we sort of glossed over a 13 billion pound bill there that they're that the government's going to settle, and the infected blood dates back to the I think to the 70s and 80s. So it is sweeping up the mess of other folk gone by. The piece for me, which is I couldn't get my head around, was there was an awful lot of leaks about changing the fiscal rules to borrow more,
Oh yeah,
and that was never going to be called out, or I think it was in the speech somewhere, but it was delivered in such a way that I couldn't understand it. It feels to me, this budget feels to me like the the tax increases are there, but they're sort of a bit hidden. There is more money being sort of thrown about for the things, as you say, that the voters rightly care about, health, education, etc., etc. But I'm not sure that I've got a sense of this being a balanced budget. It feels to me like more is being given away than is being brought in. And that might be, I hold my hands up, my innate suspicion of the Labour Party and their history of borrow, tax, and spend. But I'm sort of searching for I haven't found too much in there that sort of seems to make sense to me in terms of a consistent message.
I think one thing that is universal with budget announcements is that the announcement itself, while salivating of interest, it's how the economists, the analysts, and the media pick it apart over the next couple of days
Mm,
and kind of start to get into the detail to read between the lines and kind of understand everything. It's a 162-page document, so
yeah.
um, that there's a lot there to kind of get through. Um, so I think it will be interesting to see kind of what comes away from it. I think the opposition response was, to be honest with you, was entirely predictable, in the sense of, well, you know, this is what we were expecting to see. You said you weren't gonna raise taxes, and you did. Um, so I don't think there's any surprises there. I think the two different major parties are blaming each other about what the state of the economy was as of the election, and there are differing reports depending on who you want to listen to, whether it's the Daily Express or the OBR. Um, but I think today is probably too early to really kind of understand anything
Mm,
other than the headline things of, if you're someone that's actually on minimum wage, it's a good piece of news because your wages is definitely going to be going up. If you're someone that runs a small factory or something that's got 50 staff, then you might be starting to think, oh, bloody hell, how much is this gonna
yeah.
how much is
Yeah.
this gonna cost me? Um, so I don't know. Again, I think it's always early days. The key thing is kind of what happens afterwards. I think the budget last year seemed to be really well tried, or was presented to be kind of really upbeat and exciting, and essentially lowering taxes XYZ. But then as it was picked apart, it was kind of shown to be kind of quite the opposite over the next few days. So I think the key thing, having actually just rushed out and decided to have a podcast on the night of the
Yeah.
budget, I think the interesting thing will be to see how it's unpacked, but how it hits people from day to day. Yes, I think there's some really good things in there, but I also think, like you say, there's some things that seem to kind of contradict themselves.
Yeah. And I think, and I guess it's that, I guess for me, I always look for a narrative in a budget.
Mm.
And as you say, that the last Conservative budget, that the narrative was, and then I woke up and everything was okay, have a tax cut.
Yeah,
Um,
we know there's a
you know,
coming.
it was the end of the story, and it was, everything had kind of petered out, and so it was one last, desperate roll of the dice, and no one was listening.
Mm,
And that for me was quite a clear narrative. I think that the piece for me, as I've said in this one, is that it's this mix of lots of kind of rhetoric in there about being socially responsible, lots of rhetoric in there about, not raising personal taxes, and as well as rhetoric, that's the truth. There have been no personal taxes raised.
mhm.
Um, I think the bit for me is that element of, there was a lot of posturing before the budget about hard messaging. And I think you touched on it, before the Labour Party conference of,
It's going to be
you know,
going to be
oh, oh, brace yourself, this is going to sting.
yeah. It was almost kind of expectation setting of, this is going to be painful. Um, and I don't know whether the mess that was intentional in order so that this kind of lands more comfortably and doesn't feel then as painful as it is, because there isn't anything here that makes me, that, if I'm honest, kind of makes me sit up and go, oh bloody hell, that's going to hurt, um,
Well,
immediately. But yeah, I don't know.
so
I think it is a different tone. But then there were kind of people, reporting, or people going on media, kind of saying about, perhaps they'd overdone the "it's going to be dreadful" message, and kind of needed to dial that back, because it's almost like convincing people that everything's going to be shit. And funnily enough, if you keep telling people that everything's going to be shit, it finds a way of manifesting itself. So to some degree, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it?
mm.
It's like
Yeah, and I
mentioning the R word.
yeah. And I think the other thing that it kind of that 1.3 billion
Mm.
saving for the winter fuel allowance doesn't doesn't really look like it was
Finds, does it? For all the political cost.
for all the political cost and the potential human cost.
Mm.
If I
Yeah.
if I line it up against and I keep coming back to that fuel duty thing. You could have stuck 7p on the cost of a tank of fuel or on the cost of a litre of fuel, and nobody, there had been political capital in it, but nobody would have noticed. Absolutely nobody. Because the price to fill your car up bounces about so much, you never would have noticed. And that would have more than paid for the winter fuel allowance. And I kind of look at it and think, well, if I was a Labour Chancellor, which is probably unlikely to happen at this point,
I do think that's an unlikely career.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm a little bit kind of, I just shake my head. I don't, you know, because there was a lot of, maybe it was positioning and everything else. There was a lot of positioning I heard that said, Rachel Reeves is going to come out swinging in this budget, and it's she ain't going to pull any punches. It's going to be a bad news budget for the times that we are. And I'm like you. I look at it and I think, well, I
I don't think
yeah,
I think the more I think about it, I think that's expectation setting. I don't think it
yeah,
at first glance, as I say, it will be interesting to see as it's picked apart in the next 3 days. At first glance, I don't. There's nothing that kind of makes me sit there and think, "Oh, bloody hell!" But then again, to be fair, when you compare that to Quasi Quarting, go for growth at all cost budget, um, anything's going to look really kind of tame and quite whisper quiet in comparison, isn't it?
yeah. And I mean, a lot's been made of the Quasi's fiscal event, and the danger with any kind of push all your chips onto one color and spin the wheel is it's only ever either end spectacularly well or spectacularly badly.
Yeah.
And this does have a feel of more balance about it, but it's yeah, I, I, as you say, we'll need to allow it to be digested, but I don't think there's going to be a great deal of commentary on it because there's quite a bit of so what in there.
Well, we'll see how it unpacks over the next couple of days, and whether that will be an unraveling in the sense of it gets picked apart and picked to death, or whether that becomes of there's this more. We shall see, but we can't do all that
Exactly.
tonight. So
No, we've
let's
we've we've squeezed every ounce of goodness out of it, and obviously on Sunday evening we'll be looking ahead to our next episode. We are crossing the pond to the good old US of A, are we not?
well we are indeed. Well, that's the subject. We're not getting on a plane or a boat or anything. Just to
No,
clarify,
no.
our budget really doesn't even stretch to a ferry to Gosport, to be honest.
Well,
Um,
to be fair, it's 450 quid each if we were to go by private jet. So that's
we
that's been the deal breaker on that one.
I mean, we're both Swifties, but neither of us know her that well to be able to borrow the private jet. So, and I don't think Elon Musk is going to lend me his. So,
No.
and also probably better not that either of us try to fly him. Ahead of the other big, well, there's a couple of big events coming up, isn't there? There's the end of the Conservative leadership contest gets announced on November the 2nd, just in case there was any danger that got forgotten with the budget, and then the November the 5th, we've got the US presidential election. So remember the 5th of November. I hope that's not portentous as to what happens with the result. But yes, we will be joined by Lee Sartain, who's a senior lecturer in American history, to help us kind of pick it apart and understand, help us Brits understand and try to kind of make sense of what's happening at stateside. So do join us at 6:27 on Sunday, where we will be looking to the stars and stripes.
Absolutely. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.